Today, the President of the United States finally did something he did not want to do. After days of delay, he signed a package of new sanctions on Russia, along with Iran and North Korea, which Congress had passed with veto-proof majorities, in what now looks like a successful effort to tie the president's hands. While the president has frequently paraded his executive orders and other bill signings in front of the TV cameras, with an audience present to watch him perform his presidential duties, the signing of the Russia sanctions bill today was quite different. No cameras, no press, no nothing. The White House did release a presidential signing statement criticizing the bill. Actually, they released two different documents. The official signing statement and what they later explained was a press statement from the president, which ends on the following Trumpian note, quote, "I built a truly great company worth many billions of dollars. That is a big part of the reason I was elected. As president, I can make far better deals with foreign countries than Congress." In that statement, the president accused Congress of essentially usurping his constitutional power to set U.S. foreign policy, and he sounded what seems like a conciliatory note towards Russia. Quote, "It represents the will of the American people to see Russia take steps to improve relations with the United States. We hope there will be cooperation between our two countries on major global issues so that these sanctions will no longer be necessary." Russia, however, was unimpressed after President Vladimir Putin already ordered the U.S. to cut 755 diplomatic staff from its missions in Russia. Today, Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev unleashed a social media tirade aimed at President Trump. The U.S. president's signing of the package of new Russia sanctions ends hopes for improving our relations. The Trump administration has shown its total weakness by handing over executive power to Congress in the most humiliating way. The U.S. establishment fully outwitted Trump. The president is not happy about the sanctions, yet he could not but sign the bill. I'm joined now by Congressman Ted Lieu of California, member of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. Congressman, the signing statement sort of made a constitutional argument that this was an incursion onto the president's constitutional power to set foreign policy. Why is that not the case?
Well, thank you, Chris, for that question. Let me first say, today is an example of the U.S. Congress imposing its will on the president. Unlike authoritarian regimes, in America, Congress is a co-equal branch of government. And when I read that signing statement, actually both of them, the second one was particularly bizarre. He references Obamacare and other issues, and I don't really buy his constitutional argument. Everything in the sanctions bill, which is now law, is constitutional. Legislative Council has looked at it, and no president wants their hands tied. But in this case, we thought it was important, and on a bipartisan basis, we did that today.
Can you make the sanctions bill? This sanctions bill particularly has ended up having this great symbolic significance because of the context of the investigation into Russia's interference in the election, the possible collusion between the president's campaign and Russia in that activity. But can you make the affirmative argument on the merits for why this bill will make things better?
Absolutely. First of all, it will make it better because it hopefully will dissuade Russia from attacking us again with a massive cyber attack in the next set of federal elections. This was a bipartisan rebuke to the president saying, "Mr. President, the American people and Congress do not trust you to do the right thing when it comes to Russia." And it's a rebuke to Russia saying, "Do not try to influence our elections again because you're going to get consequences worse than if you had tried."
So you think the consequences, these mostly target oil and gas. There's a little bit of the legislation, as I understand it, that's somewhat Magnitsky Act-esque insofar as individuals associated with the actual penetration can also be targeted. You think that acts as a deterrent?
It does, and one of the most important parts of this legislation is it prevents Donald Trump from lifting sanctions on Russia without congressional review and approval, because we want to make sure that he doesn't take actions that favor the Russian government without Congress knowing about it.
What did you make of both? There was a sort of strange kind of smoke signal, it felt, in the run-up to this, with the president sort of dithering. There was there was lack of clarity about whether they would sign it. He said he was going to sign it, signed it quietly, and then the Russians sort of leaping at the chance to sort of troll and bait the president, but also conceding that he didn't want to sign it, as if the message had been sent to Moscow that this was not his idea.
It's very clear the president didn't want to sign this legislation, and I think the Russians are realizing what Republican members are realizing now, which is we have a weak president. Donald Trump is weak, not just because it's been White House chaos, but also because he has historically low approval ratings, and he has very low influence over Republican and Democratic legislators. It's why he couldn't even get Obamacare repeal passed, and that's what we're seeing now, a weak president with a surging more confident Congress.
What's the next step to your mind in U.S.-Russia relations? If they respond with some sort of retaliatory reaction of their own in response to these, where does this go?
I don't have any problem with having the United States having closer relations with other countries, including with Russia. I have a problem when our president looks like he is beholden to the Russian government, and that's in part why Congress sent this powerful bipartisan message. But there's many issues we deal with on Russia other than cyber issues. There are issues relating to foreign affairs, issues relating to trade and commerce. We can work with Russia on a number of issues. And keep in mind, Russia is part of the Iran deal as well. So there's many areas where the U.S. does cooperate with Russia and will continue to do so.
All right, Congressman Ted Lieu, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.